With the 2025 to 2026 Auburn men's basketball roster becoming official, how will the Tigers line up on opening night? Welcome into today's edition of the Barn Hoops Podcast. I am Jacob Hillman. Thank you for tuning in once again as the Auburn men's basketball roster is officially set. We had immediate reaction to the return of Tahaad Pettiford and the commitment and signing of Filip Jovic on the Top Button podcast with Kyle Rush. I joined him last week when those announcements were made. So if you want the instant reaction, you can go back and listen to those. Today, we're going to go a little bit more in depth on what the roster looks like and some of those numbers, some of the heights and weights, and then how the Tigers might line up when opening night rolls around in November in Neville Arena or wherever that may be as we learn more of the schedule. But before we get started, as always, today's show is brought to you by MyBookie. Go to mybookie.ag for a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000 whenever you use the coupon code BARN. That's BARN, BARN, for a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000 at mybookie.ag. NBA Finals, NHL, Stanley Cup Finals are underway, and the action is great in professional sports. So you can go to mybookie.ag and get in on the action with a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000 using the coupon code BARN for the finals before we get into the summer. All right, so the Auburn men's basketball roster is set. As I mentioned, Tahaad Pettiford announced his return to the Tigers and this coaching staff last week at the deadline of the NBA draft withdrawal. And then it was Filip Jovic on the same day following Tahaad's announcement, or it might have been before, mentioning that he was committing and signing with the Tigers out of the international ranks. He will come in as a freshman. He's obviously been playing professional basketball over the last few years, coming out of Serbia, and that's where Nikola Jokic got his start in professional basketball before making an impact in the NBA as he has for so many years. So looking at the roster right now as we dive into what some of this, Tahaad Pettiford will wear number 0 as he did last year. Kevin Overton wears number 1 and is listed as a guard/forward. That's very interesting to me. Is, you know, with Coach Pearl and this staff, they like to utilize guys that can play multiple positions. That's going to be the case with Kevin Overton as well as Elijah Freeman and Keyshawn Hall. And I do think it's interesting because I think Overton is a guy that can handle the ball pretty well and consistently and fill in that point guard role when needed, if needed, obviously, with Tahaad Pettiford and Caden Magwood being the main two guys at that spot going into the year. Overton listed at 6'5" and 200 pounds, the junior out of Oklahoma City. He's obviously the transfer from Texas Tech. Abdul Bashir is number 2, listed as a guard at 6'7", 165 pounds out of the JUCO ranks. Keyshawn Murphy will wear number 3, listed as a forward at 6'10", 230 pounds. The senior is out of Birmingham, Alabama, obviously the Mississippi State transfer. Caden Magwood, the freshman, listed at 6'2", 175 pounds, will wear number 5. And then this is the interesting thing, because obviously, at least to me, it was just now a new rule where you can wear a numeral higher than 5. It used to be that you could only wear 0 through 5. So the highest number you could wear was 55, but you couldn't wear 47 or 46 or 6 or 7 like Elijah Freeman and Keyshawn Hall will wear. So Elijah Freeman listed as a guard and forward at 6'8", 185 pounds. Sophomore will wear number 6. Keyshawn Hall, the transfer out of Central Florida, is listed at 6'7", 240 pounds, and will wear number 7. Freshman Simon Walker, 6'4" guard out of Huntsville High School, will wear number 10. And then Emeka Oporum, the center, the 7-footer out of the junior college ranks, who had the most blocks in junior college this past season, is wearing number 14. And as we move down to wrap up the scholarship players, at least, Sebastian Williams-Adams, the freshman out of St. John's High School in Houston, Texas, will wear number 33 and is listed at 6'8", 230 pounds. And then Filip Jovic will wear number 38, a 6'8", 225-pound forward, freshman out of Bosnia. Well, and here's the key with this lineup and making this roster quote unquote official is that it's hard to expect any other cards to fall. Usually, Coach Pearl does leave a few scholarship spots open. It's potential to give one to a walk-on, and you know there's a lot of guys on this roster that are not on scholarship and will have a chance to earn one. Obviously, as they are so critical to this roster, to this program, and to this team, just because of what they do in the weight room, in practice, and on the scout team for Auburn basketball. And that's really a credit to how Coach Pearl and the rest of his staff have recruited these guys to come in and obviously know that they're not going to be playing in these big-time SEC matchups or top 25 matchups unless Auburn is obviously handling business, and they'll get in at the end. But they understand what the hard work means and how that can help them going forward. So potential lineups for this team. It's really going to be difficult to project this, I think, because of how many of these guys can play in different positions. And obviously practice hasn't really gotten started yet, so we don't even begin to know how these guys are really gelling together. We don't know who works best together. We won't know that until we see them on the floor for whenever that exhibition is, and then whenever the season opens in the first week of November. But I think the way I see the starting lineup at first will be obviously Tahaad Pettiford at the point guard. That's something that I feel like you can be pretty confident in, as well as Keyshawn Murphy starting at center. Outside of that, I don't think there's as much confidence as far as what exactly the starting lineup will be. Probably Filip Jovic will be the power forward at the 4. Keyshawn Hall, I think, will be the 3. But again, Keyshawn Hall could easily play 2 through 4 if needed. And then I think at shooting guard, I think the two guard is one of the more intriguing spots on this team as far as the starter, because again, this is something that I think sometimes, especially in basketball, it's not the most important. You know, the starting lineup is important, but it's the roster that closes out the game. It's the roster that plays the most minutes, or the rotation that plays the most minutes together. And that is the key to winning basketball games. I think what you saw last year with Auburn was obviously starting with a defensive first lineup with Denver Jones, Miles Kelly, Chad Baker, Mazzara, Janai Broome, and Dylan Cardwell getting the start. But a lot of times at the end of games, some of those guys weren't in because they didn't bring necessarily the best offensive threat that you could. Tahaad Pettiford usually would be in at the end of games because of his clutch gene and his offensive playmaking ability, and things would shift around just depending on who's hot and cold that day or that week. So I think the starting lineup, I like Tahaad Pettiford and then Kevin Overton, I think, at the 2 guard to start things off, just because of his experience at Texas Tech and in the Power 5 conferences. That's something that can really help Auburn get off to a good start, help this roster gel together, and really figure things out early on, because I think that's something that Auburn fans might not be ready for or expect after this past season, where Auburn came out just blitzing teams early in the season, and really good ones at that. Houston obviously made it all the way to the national championship. Auburn beat the Cougars on the road in Houston, really to start that season and launch Auburn into the top 5 of the rankings. And this year, it's going to be a similar deal with Auburn hosting, quote unquote, hosting Houston. It's a neutral site game in Birmingham, but we know that Auburn will have the majority of the fans in Legacy Arena. I just think that the more experience you have on the floor to start games, that's going to help some of these younger guys, or some of these guys that are transitioning from the JUCO Division II level as well as high school, get into the flow of things, so that there's not as much pressure on them when they check into the game as a game goes on. But after that, I don't think that doesn't mean I'm doubting Elijah Freeman or Abdul Bashir or even a Caden Magwood to possibly get that start at the 2. I think Magwood's going to be your backup one, but I think Abdul Bashir and Elijah Freeman, obviously Bashir from the JUCO ranks, he was the top scorer in junior college this past season, averaging north of 27 points per game. And Elijah Freeman, the 6'8" guy from Lincoln Memorial in Division II, he is such a long frame and an athletic guy. He knows how to get to the basket, and he can shoot the ball as well. So that's where I am the least confident in, because you brought in Filip Jovic for a reason. You brought in Keyshawn Murphy for a reason. Keyshawn Hall, I think, is one of those dynamic players and a guy that he's a five-tool player, to use a baseball term here. He can play 2 through 4, and you feel confident in that in case something happens. But then at the shooting guard position, like I said, I think any of those guys could get those starting minutes, could play the most minutes. I think it could be a case of Kevin Overton. Yeah, maybe he starts, but then Elijah Freeman's the one that plays more minutes. Or if Abdul Bashir comes in and plays, if he's as good as maybe Miles Kelly was last year, then he could get the start at the 2 guard and play the most minutes there. But again, it's a little bit too early to project those things. We don't even know what practices looked like or what it's going to look like. We don't know how these guys have gelled together. Obviously, they've been hanging out, though. You probably have seen that they've been at the lake. They've gone to Plains Park to support the Auburn baseball team as they advance to the Super Regional, and they're obviously getting to know each other and are enjoying themselves at this point. But when it gets to the basketball court, we'll figure all that out as it goes. Now, outside of that, what kind of other potential lineups could you see? You look at if it is Pettiford, Freeman, Hall, Jovic, and Murphy, that leads to the 2 deep of Magwood, Overton, Bashir, Williams-Adams, and Oporum. That's a pretty fun second tier, and that's not to mention Simon Walker, who fits that 1 guard or 2 guard role. And I do think that another key is when Caden Magwood is running the one at points during the season. You probably want someone like Kevin Overton, as I mentioned, to start games, but also to be out there with the freshman point guard and let him settle things down if necessary. And Overton's played the one at Texas Tech, and he can do that here at Auburn as well. So Sebastian Williams-Adams and Emeka Oporum, if you look at the front court, I think they provide great depth. Sebastian Williams-Adams, 6'8", 4-star out of high school. He's going to be a guy that, I don't want to compare his game necessarily to Jalen Williams, but I think he can have the impact that Jalen Williams had early in his career, where Jalen Williams didn't play a ton early in his freshman year. That was the 2019-20 campaign with Isaac Okoro leading the charge, as well as seniors like Javon McCormick, Samir Dowdy, Danzel Purifoy, Austin Wiley, Anthony McLemore. But later in that year, when Okoro went down with an injury and the lineup had to be tweaked a little bit, Williams stepped in and made a huge impact. You remember the off the backboard alley-oop against Tennessee to himself? That was one of his first games that he was getting significant minutes in, and he did the same against Georgia, had a great game in that freshman campaign. I think Sebastian Williams-Adams can have a similar impact where he's going to step up when he's called upon, and whenever he's called upon, he's going to have a lot of success. Then Emeka Oporum, top 10 in blocks in junior college, 7-footer. He's the tallest, I think, by far on this roster. Keyshawn Murphy's only listed at 6'10". I say only, but his athleticism allows him to play center at that size. Oporum, though, on the other hand, he does use his length, and I think he's going to have a lot of developing to do on the offensive end, but he's going to be a great defensive player just off the bat. And I think the offensive ability will come along as he starts to face some tougher competition and figures out what he's able to do against that tougher competition. Right now, the way I would list it, I think I would have Abdul Bashir at the 3 as the backup 3 behind Keyshawn Hall. I like him as a spark plug off the bench. I mean, if you have Magwood and Bashir coming off the bench at the same time, that's something that opponents are going to really have to game plan for and key in on, because those are 2 dynamic scorers that also know how to really be smart with their scoring. I think both of them know how to get to the basket as well as bomb 3-pointers. We know all about what Bashir can do from 3, but I think both of these guys are good at getting to the basket and will use that to their advantage. And then, as I mentioned, Simon Walker, yeah, he's probably the 3rd guy off the bench for that 1 or 2 spot, but you never know when you might be called upon. And Walker has the ability to come in and shoot the ball well and do his thing. So I think that second tier, I think what you could possibly also see is a lineup of something like Tahaad Pettiford, Abdul Bashir, Keyshawn Hall, and then you could have a Murphy and Oporum. I think you can put, if Jovic needs a rest or something like that, Murphy and Oporum can be in the game at the same time. Murphy is a guy that can play the 4 spot, similar to the way Janai Broome played it over the last 2 years, because that was the key last year. Was Dylan Cardwell's coming back. Coach Pearl and that staff promised him a starting spot. So Janai just had to move up to the 4, even though he was a center. Janai still ended up playing the center quite a bit last year, just depending on when Dylan was in the game or wasn't. So I think that's a similar role there, where Oporum, he's not going to play much of the 4, but Murphy can move around a little bit between the 4 and 5. If Jovic needs to be off the floor, or he moves up to the 3 for some reason, if Keyshawn Hall, or who knows, what the different dynamics, the different combinations that you can do, I think with this roster are a little bit endless. I just think that we're going to have to wait and see, quite frankly, on what the best rotation is, or what the best rotations are, and how they gel together whenever you're playing Houston and Birmingham in early November. You're going to learn a lot. That's going to be a number 2, number 3 team in the country at that point. Auburn obviously could be in the top 10 as well. It's not to discredit the Tigers, but you're going to know a little bit more about what you're going to get out of Houston and Purdue and some of these other teams that Auburn is slated to play in the non-conference schedule, versus this brand new team, quite frankly. Tahaad Pettiford's returning, and that's great, but you still have so many unknowns past that. And I think that's why Auburn wants to challenge itself in the first 2 months of the season, so that it's ready for that tough SEC grind. And with that being said, we don't know any SEC opponents right now, but we're starting to learn some of the non-conference opponents that Auburn will face inside Neville Arena this upcoming season. A couple of reports coming out over the last week. Starting 2 days ago, John Rossi reported that the Tigers will host Queens University on December 29th as part of its non-conference schedule, likely the last non-conference game leading into SEC play of the 25-26 campaign. And then there's Rocco Miller at Rocco Miller 8. He reported that Auburn will host Wofford on Tuesday, November 11th. That game could be one of the first home games of the schedule. I don't think it'll be the opener, but we'll see how everything shakes out. Obviously, Auburn's going to face Houston on November 18th. And I just think that the way this schedule shakes out, it's something where you really do want to try and challenge yourself, but you don't want to challenge yourself too much. You don't want to lose confidence. And I think that's something Coach Pearl mentioned last year with the schedule, was trying to get this team ready, but you've got to give and take. And I think with these 2 opponents, they're mid-major opponents, they're lower tier, but they're coming to Neville Arena, and that's going to be a good way for Auburn to settle in and get ready for the likes of Houston and Birmingham. That game's on November 18th. That game is actually later than I anticipated. And fortunately, I think it is, because it's going to fall on a Sunday on Auburn football's bye week, which is good. That means anyone who's in the Auburn area, travel up to Birmingham on Sunday, not be worn out from a football game day the day prior, and go and enjoy the weekend in Birmingham at Legacy Arena as Auburn faces a top 5 Houston team. So that's also due to some TV, I would guess. I think that college basketball is going to fare better against the NFL than it would against college football. It's hard to believe that, but I think those audiences cross over a little bit less than obviously college basketball and college football. So instead of the 9 o'clock tip-off on ESPNU like last season for Auburn and Houston, I think you're going to get an early afternoon prime slot, maybe on ESPN proper, for the Tigers and Cougars in Birmingham. We're obviously going to continue to learn more about the schedule as the weeks go on, as we move into June. I expect in the next few weeks, Auburn to learn its SEC opponents. And I don't know about dates or anything like that, but we'll know who Auburn's going to play home and away, and who Auburn's going to play twice as that gets released over the next few weeks. And then I would also anticipate the Players Era Festival to start to release some details. We've seen Iowa State release its schedule, listing the Players Era Festival in Las Vegas as November 25th to November 29th. I think Kansas released its schedule, and the schedule is a little bit different. So I don't know when that tournament's going to be held. No one really does, it seems like, at this point, except for those 2 schools who are planning to be there that week of November. So we'll find out more about the format and the opponents that Auburn might play in Las Vegas as they play in that tournament for the first time ever, for the first time of 3 straight years in Las Vegas. So that's a very important one. And quite frankly, I can't wait for that one. I think that'll be a lot of fun. And of course, we mentioned Holiday Hoopsgiving. That's another one that we anticipate Auburn to be in Atlanta at State Farm Arena, probably December 13th. That Saturday between the Arizona game in Tucson and the Purdue game in Indianapolis on December 20th, right there around graduation. So we'll learn those opponents as time moves on. But that's going to do it for today's edition of the Barn Hoops podcast. Also later tonight, Auburn baseball against Coastal Carolina in the Super Regional round at Plainsman Park. I'll tell you what, the scenes last week at Plainsman Park for the Auburn Regional when the Tigers went 3-0, taking down Central Connecticut State, taking down Stetson, and taking down NC State were unbelievable. But they will not even come close to matching what is in store for this weekend at Plainsman Park. Go head on over to the Barn Auburn YouTube channel and check out the Barn Baseball Show. Lindsey Crosby and Brad Law have all the coverage, all the previews for this weekend. Obviously, Village Vice with Zach Blackerby and Brad have you covered, as well as the Top Button podcast with Kyle Rush, a.k.a. Charlie 5. So plenty of coverage for Auburn baseball's incredible run that continues tonight. That's at 8 o'clock Central. It's a late night game. It is a late night game, but that's going to make the atmosphere all that much better before 2 o'clock turnaround tomorrow at Plainsman Park. And then game 3 is at a time to be announced if necessary. Hopefully Auburn can handle business in games 1 and 2 and get some rest for Omaha next week. But again, check out all of those previews on the Barn Auburn Network. We're covering it all, and obviously we're getting to the off season, and football season is just around the corner. So getting ready for that as the baseball season starts to wind down, and hopefully that winds down with a long run at the College World Series in Omaha. But again, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Barn Hoops podcast. Thank you for tuning in as we finally make that 25 to 26 roster official. We're going to start to make some more of that 25 to 26 schedule official. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.